Our top story for today, the sentencing hearing for a woman found guilty of murdering her boyfriend took an unexpected turn Friday. 33-year-old Barbara Cupp, who was convicted of murder on March 27th of this year, was supposed to receive her sentencing at 2 p.m. Instead, the defense came with a motion to give Cupp a new trial. It was discovered that one of the jurors allegedly had not been forthcoming about their knowledge of the defendant and her family. The prosecution argued that no prejudice was made by the juror that would have impacted the outcome of the trial. Judge Robert Waters commented that the trial lasted 5 days and they had 2 alternative jurors to avoid this issue. Defense attorney George Cosenza argued neither the defense or prosecution were aware of the deception. Cosenza and his team have until July 7th to prepare a brief describing to the court why a new trial is necessary.